rain had already begun to fall when Elena found herself standing at the top of the grand staircase, her trembling fingers gripping the polished mahogany banister as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her body was heavy, her heart heavier still, and inside her womb, a tiny heartbeat pulsed with life, innocent to the cruelty unfolding around them. The mansion she once called home glistened with golden light, chandeliers sparkling as though mocking her, but everything inside her felt dark. The man she loved, the man she had given everything to, stood before her with cold, unfeeling eyes, his jaw tight, his lips curled into disdain. "Leave," he said, his voice like stone, sharp enough to cut. "I don't want you here anymore. You don't make me happy." "She does." The words struck her like blows, knocking the air from her lungs. She wanted to believe she had misheard, that it was anger speaking, not truth. But the way Adrian's gaze drifted past her, the way his hand clenched possessively at the wrist of the young woman standing behind him, left no room for hope. His mistress, perfectly styled, dripping in jewels, her painted lips curved into a triumphant smirk, looked at Elena not with pity, but with satisfaction, like a queen victorious in battle. Elena's knees weakened. Her suitcase sat by the door where Adrian had tossed it earlier, as though she were nothing more than a guest overstaying her welcome. She wanted to scream, to ask him how he could be so cruel, how he could discard the woman carrying his child. But her voice was trapped in her throat, smothered by the weight of betrayal. All she managed was a whisper, her palm instinctively moving to cradle her stomach. "Adrian, I'm your wife. I'm carrying your baby." For a moment, silence filled the air, a silence so heavy it seemed to echo off the marble floors. She searched his for the flicker of remorse she desperately needed, for the softness that had once lived in his eyes when he looked at her. But all she saw was indifference. The mistress chuckled under her breath, her hand sliding over his arm, as if to remind Elena of her new place, outside, unwanted, forgotten. "Leave," he repeated, his tone colder now, final, the way one might dismiss a servant. A storm raged inside her chest. Memories flashed like lightning, their wedding vows beneath a canopy of roses, his hand in hers as they built dreams together, the nights they had whispered about the family they would raise. Had all of it been a lie? Or had love simply decayed, rotted by greed and temptation? Tears blurred her sight, but she forced her feet to move. Her fingers curled around the handle of the suitcase. Each step toward the door felt like walking through fire, her body screaming with pain, her soul shattering with every inch she put between herself and the life she thought she knew. When she reached the doorway, she turned once, praying, hoping that he would call her back, that he would rush to her, fall to his knees, beg her forgiveness. But Adrian stood motionless, his arm around the other woman, his face carved from ice. The heavy wooden door closed behind her with a thud, sealing her fate. Outside, the night greeted her with merciless rain. It drenched her instantly, soaking through her thin coat, chilling her skin to the bone. She clutched her suitcase tighter, her other hand pressed protectively against her belly. The city beyond the mansion gates was alive with the hum of traffic, the distant glow of neon signs, yet Elena had never felt so alone. Every step she took down the wet pavement like a verdict: unwanted, abandoned, betrayed. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the strength of the human spirit, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Royal Stories. Your support helps us bring more powerful, real-life-inspired tales that remind us of resilience and hope. As she walked, her mind wrestled with disbelief. Just hours ago, she had prepared his favorite dinner, wearing the dress he once said made her look like sunlight. She had been excited to share the sound of their baby's heartbeat from her latest checkup. She had imagined him smiling, maybe even crying tears of joy. Instead, she had been met with coldness, with a mistress perched at their table, with the sharp sting of rejection slicing her open. Her shoes splashed through puddles as the rain grew heavier. She had nowhere to go, no family close by, no friends she could lean on. Adrian had insisted they didn't need anyone but each other, and foolishly, she had believed him. Now, stripped of everything familiar, she felt like a stranger in her own life. But as despair threatened to consume her, she pressed her hand more firmly to her stomach. The child inside her shifted slightly, a reminder that she was not alone, that she carried within her a piece of hope, a reason to keep walking. Unbeknownst to Adrian, Elena's bloodline carried a secret he never cared to uncover. She was not simply the woman he thought he had rescued from a modest background. She was the only daughter of Viktor Ivanov, a brilliant yet reclusive businessman whose empire spanned continents. When her father had passed, Elena had inherited everything, a staggering fortune exceeding 50 million. But she had chosen to keep this truth hidden, longing to be loved not for her wealth, but for her heart. She had wanted a partner who saw her for who she was, not for what she possessed. Adrian never asked, and Elena never told. She had believed their love was pure, untainted by greed. Tonight proved how wrong she had been. By the time she reached the dimly lit corner of the street, her body was trembling. She flagged down a taxi, her voice hoarse as she asked to be taken anywhere far from the mansion. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, noting her soaked clothes, her pale face, the way she clutched her stomach protectively. But he asked no questions. The car sped through the slick streets, leaving behind the world she once belonged to. Inside the cab, Elena stared out at the blurred city lights. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mingling with raindrops, but there was a spark in her chest that refused to die. Pain would not destroy her. Abandonment would not define her. She was carrying not just a child, but the legacy of her father, the strength of her mother, and the fire of her own resilience. Somewhere deep within, she whispered to herself, "This is not the end. It's the beginning." And so, on a stormy night when she lost everything, Elena also gained something greater. The resolve to rise from the ashes, to prove that no betrayal, no cruelty, no rejection could extinguish the light within her. The taxi left her at the edge of an unfamiliar neighborhood. The rain still falling in heavy sheets, soaking the cracked sidewalks and glistening street lamps. Elena stepped out, her suitcase heavy in her hand, her heart even heavier in her chest. She had asked the driver to take her, anywhere far from here, and he had complied. The world around her was a stark contrast to the opulence of the mansion. Narrow buildings stacked side by side, laundry strung across balconies, the smell of wet earth mixed with smoke from street vendors, who still tried to sell food despite the storm. She dragged her suitcase down the uneven pavement until she found a small building with a crooked sign that read, "Rooms for Rent." Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of dust and damp wood. The landlord, an elderly woman with tired eyes, took pity on the young, drenched figure standing before her. Without asking many questions, she offered Elena a tiny studio with peeling paint, a flickering bulb, and a window that rattled whenever the wind howled. It was far from home, far from luxury, but it was a roof. That first night, Elena lay on the thin mattress, her arms wrapped tightly around her belly. The silence was overwhelming. Gone were the echoes of laughter in wide hallways, the warmth of a fireplace, the familiar sound of Adrian's footsteps. Instead, there was only the faint dripping of rain through a crack in the ceiling, and the occasional shouts of neighbors through the paper, thin walls. She wanted to break down, to let despair consume her. But then she felt it, a faint kick from within her womb, a reminder that she had to endure. Her tears eventually gave way to resolve. She whispered into the darkness, "We'll survive this. I promise." The following weeks were grueling. With her savings limited, Elena lived sparingly. She bought second-hand clothes, cooked simple meals of rice and soup, and carefully counted every coin. Her pregnancy made it harder. Her body was heavy, her back ached, and exhaustion pulled at her every step. Yet, she refused to let herself collapse. She had always been educated, gifted in languages and writing, and so she turned to the only thing she could do from her small apartment: freelance work. She stayed up late at night, typing translations, editing documents, writing articles for small businesses online. Her eyes burned from the screen, her fingers cramped, but every completed project meant another day of survival. Still, loneliness haunted her. The woman who had once been surrounded by luxury and now faced long, silent nights, broken only by the sounds of her own breathing and the restless stirring of her unborn child. Sometimes she sat by the rattling window, staring out at the city lights in the distance, wondering if Adrian ever thought of her. Did he regret what he had done? Did he even care? These thoughts stung, but she forced herself to push them aside. The child growing inside her deserved a mother who was strong, not broken. The months passed, and her belly grew rounder, heavier. She walked slowly now, supporting herself against walls when she climbed the creaking stairs of the building. Yet she worked relentlessly, fueled by the love she already felt for the life inside her. The neighbors occasionally whispered about her. a young pregnant woman living alone, struggling to get by. But Elena held her head high. She was determined to protect her dignity, to prove that even without wealth or a husband, she could endure. Finally, one cold winter morning, her labor began. The pain was unlike anything she had ever known, waves of agony tearing through her as she clutched the sheets of her narrow bed. Alone and terrified, she dialed for help, her voice trembling as she begged for an ambulance. Hours later, in a sterile hospital room lit by harsh white lights, she gave birth to a baby boy. The moment the doctor placed him in her arms, everything changed. He was small, fragile, with tiny fists that curled instinctively around her finger. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered his name, Gabriel. In his innocent eyes, she saw not just a child, but salvation. He was her reason to fight, her anchor in a world that had tried to sink her. All the loneliness, all the heartbreak, all the sleepless nights, they melted away as she held him against her chest. Caring for Gabriel was both exhausting and life-giving. Her days blurred into a cycle of feeding, soothing, working late into the night, and rising early to start again. She often went without sleep, her body weak, but her heart full. She would sing to him softly, telling him stories of courage and hope, even when her own voice cracked with fatigue. Though she had little, she gave him everything she could, her love, her time, her strength, and slowly, something began to awaken within her. The fire she thought betrayal had extinguished began to glow again. She remembered her father's words from long ago, spoken to her when she was still a girl. One day, you will face trials that test your soul. But remember, you carry not just my name, but my strength. Do not let the world break you. Rise, Elena, and claim what is yours. And for the first time since Adrian had cast her out, she began to think of her inheritance. The 50 million fortune that she had kept hidden all these years, believing she did not need it, believing love was more valuable than wealth. But now, with a child depending on her, she realized it was not vanity to step into her legacy. It was survival, it was responsibility. She began reaching out quietly to her father's old lawyers, re-establishing ties with his company. At first, they were skeptical. To them, she was just a young woman who had disappeared into obscurity. But when she spoke, when she laid out her vision, when she showed them her determination, they began to see the same fire that had once driven Viktor Ivanov. Slowly, cautiously, she began to step back into the empire her father had built. Yet, she told no one, not her neighbors, not even the nurses at the hospital. She still lived in her modest apartment, still worked late into the night, still raised Gabriel with her own two hands. She wanted her rise to be steady, deliberate, free of arrogance. She wanted to prove, to herself, to the world, that betrayal could not break her, that strength was not born from wealth but from endurance. In the quiet of her small room, as Gabriel slept beside her, Elena would sometimes let her gaze linger on the ceiling and whisper to herself, Adrian thinks he destroyed me. But one day he will see. He will see that I was never the weak one. I was always the fire he could not contain. And so, from the ashes of heartbreak, from the loneliness of a rented room, Elena began her journey of survival. What Adrian never knew, what he would not discover until it was far too late, was that the woman he had thrown away would soon rise higher than he could ever dream, carrying not only her own strength, but the unstoppable legacy of her family.